called me from the ashes, you have broken every curse. Blessed Redeemer, you have set this captive free. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last he has ransomed me, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
Welcome to this third lesson of the Mighty Men and the Wise Women Bible Study series. Now, we spent the last two lessons talking about Jonathan and his armor bearer and how Jonathan and his armor bearer had a relationship of trust and absolute reliability. In fact, the way the armor bearer talks about it, he says, you turn here, you turn this way and I'll be there, you turn that way and I'll be there, and how Jonathan and his armor bearer put their total faith in God. Because you can only imagine being just a few hundred in the first place when you're looking at 30,000 chariots and 3,000 horse soldiers and more footmen or regular soldiers than the sands of the sea, and your whole army numbers in just a few hundred. Then Jonathan and his armor bearer, just two, are willing to take on an entire garrison of Philistines. And you remember how Jonathan said it. He said, "For God is not constrained to save by a few or through many," right? It's not about numbers for God, it's about faith. So you can only imagine if you were looking over a field of Philistines and all the sharp and shiny objects, all intended to bring harm upon your body, and the kind of faith it takes to trust God that He can work against such odds. But having faith when you're outnumbered or when there's every reason to feel hopeless or to feel like your future is desolate, there's more than just spears that you can be intimidated by or frightened by. So I invite you to turn in your Bibles to the book of Ruth, It's one of the greatest love stories in the Scriptures, for it parallels the greatest love story of all time. It's a story about a young woman who has tremendous faith and who puts herself in a place to trust God, to believe that He will take care of her, that He will provide for her. She is not going to be looking at such pointed objects, although that's not too far removed from the possibilities, but she's certainly in a different place. So we've talked about mighty men. Let's talk about wise women, about what an amazing example of faith that Ruth is. Now, the way the book of Ruth opens, it follows, of course, the book of Judges, because it's in that same time frame. In fact, it says in verse 1, "Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land." So this is prior to the kings, at a very time when Israel's history and their experience was tumultuous. They were being oppressed by often the Philistines, not always just the Philistines, and then they would suffer and they would cry out, and then God would bring them a judge who would deliver them, and then they would experience peace as they put their faith in the Lord. But the problem was they would get distracted and they would start serving idols again, the gods after their own appetite, so God would remove His blessing and His protection, and then they would suffer again. They would finally realize that they haven't been trusting God, and so they would call out to Him. They would reach back to Him, and God was right there, and so He would bless them and protect them. And they go through this cycle through the book of Judges over and over and over. So Ruth's life is lived out during one of these cycles. It's a time in Israel's history when they are struggling with a famine. It says there's a famine in the land. That means people are suffering. That means they're not able to grow crops. That means people are going hungry. That means that people's wealth or whatever possessions they have is being impacted. The farmers are struggling because there's no crops, and that affects the entire economy of the nation. It's so bad, in fact, that there's a certain man of Bethlehem. It's amazing how history intersects, for this will be the very place where the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, will be born centuries later. And there's even a greater connection in this book than just the geography. But there's a man that's from Bethlehem in Judah, and so he went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. Now, it is an interesting thing to consider that life must be so hard, or that this man has felt so hopeless that he would leave Israel, that he would leave his brethren, that he would leave the place where he worships God, this place that has been given to them by God for their possession. were not that many generations from their original settlement of Israel. It wasn't that long ago that Moses had led them out of Egypt and Joshua leads them across the Jordan River. And so to leave Israel is to leave the place that God has promised, God has provided, and that God is protecting. Not only does he leave Israel, but he leaves for Moab. Well, Moab is the land of Israel's enemies. In fact, you can go back into the book of Judges, even in chapter 3 and verse 14, and read about how under Eglon, the Moab king, that the sons of Israel serve Moab for 18 years before God delivers them through a very unexpected way through one of his judges. So to go to Moab is the land of your enemies, the land of your oppressors. So you are choosing leaving Israel, a place promised, provided, and protected by God himself, to go to the land of your enemies. Now, not only are the Moabites enemies, but they have had a heavy influence on Israel's struggles. And so turn to Deuteronomy chapter 23. I guess as we read that, he goes to Moab, it just lands so hard that you would go to Moab? In Deuteronomy chapter 23, Moses says, through the Lord's guidance in verse 3, he says, "No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord," because, so these two are called out. Now, Moab is the oldest son of Lot. You remember when Lot moved into Sodom and Gomorrah and becomes a part of that culture, the angels are going to bring destruction. Abraham asks for mercy, and so the two angels come to Lot's house, and they warn him to flee, and they have to hold off the townsmen that want to do terrible things. And so then Lot is led out of Sodom and Gomorrah. His wife looks back, turned into a pillar of salt, and then God brings destruction on that whole valley. And then you remember that Lot's two daughters were convinced they were the last three humans on earth, so they got Lot drunk one night so that one of the daughters could sleep with her father, the second night the same thing. And so Ammon and Moab are the result of that. So the descendants of Moab, the Moabites, they are a part of Abraham's descendants, but through that really difficult wrinkle, to say the least, in Lot's debasement by his daughters. Well, as Moses continues to write by the Lord's guidance, they are never to enter into the assembly of the Lord because they did not meet you with food and water on the way when you came up out of Egypt. Because they should be brethren. They are at least cousins. They're fellow descendants of Abraham, so they should have welcomed them home, welcome back, because the promise was given to Abraham and his descendants, which would have included the Moabites and the Hebrews coming out of Egypt. So they should have had that in common. They should have been met with food and water, celebration, we'll help you, etc. Instead, it says, they didn't do that, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. Nevertheless, the Lord your God was not willing to listen to Balaam, but the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord loves you. You shall never seek their peace or their prosperity all their days. That's pretty strong stuff. So not only are the Moabites Israel's enemies, but they are also a treacherous enemy because they should have been family. But they have never treated Israel as family, even from the days when they came out of Egypt. And so they were told to not be a part of this, to not be included in this. And then turn to Judges chapter 10. And you'll notice in Judges chapter 10, the warning is there in verse 6. Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, served the Baals and the Ataroth, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon. the gods of Moab, the gods of the sons of Ammon, etc., and they forsook the Lord and did not serve him, and so the anger burns against Israel. So Moab has been and is their enemy. They rejected the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. They did not receive them as family. And in fact, they tried to curse them, so they were working against them. They've been opposed to them. And they have experienced the very thing they were warned about, that they have been wrapped up in the Moabites' idolatrous worship. And so everything about Moab is dark. It is evil. It is in opposition to Israel. So when we read so quickly at the end of verse 1, he went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. A man from Judah, from Bethlehem, that goes to Moab. So that makes us have to pause and think, what has gone wrong here? Why is this man rejecting the promised land in order to go to the land of the enemies, those who have been opposed to the people of God? Well, we keep reading in verse 2. The name of this man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there, and then Elimelech's, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. So in those days, of course, a woman's security was in her husband taking care of her, and then as they would age, then in her sons taking care of her. And that's what was common, that family took care of family. And so as parents bring children into the world, and then they care for their children, and then as time continues and the parents become older, then the children take care of their parents, and that has been how family has taken care of family. And that's what you would expect. So her husband dies, Naomi's husband dies, but she has 2 sons. Verse 4, they took for themselves Moabite women as wives, and the name was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. So this man has moved his wife and sons into the land of Moab, into the enemy's land, both physically and spiritually. And then he passes away. Well, the mother has her 2 sons. She does not return to Israel at that time, which would have been interesting. Why not? I mean, if her husband dies, I don't know the age of her sons when he first dies. Obviously, they're old enough to marry here by the end of the verse. But why doesn't Naomi go home and bring her 2 sons with her and go home? But she doesn't. In fact, her sons marry 2 women from that area, from Moab. And that becomes a problem. Turn over to Exodus chapter 34. So God had already said they're not to be allowed in the assembly, they're not to be allowed among the people of God because of their treachery, how they had rejected them, etc. Well, in Deuteronomy 34, verse 10, then God said, behold, I'm going to make a covenant before all you people. I will perform miracles which have not been produced in all the earth, nor among any of the nations. And all the people among whom you live will see the working of the Lord, for it is a fearful thing that I'm going to perform with you. Be sure to observe what I'm commanding you this day. Behold, I'm going to drive out the Amorite before you, and the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Watch yourselves that you make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land into which you are going, or it will become a snare in your midst. But rather you're to tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars and cut down their asherim, for you shall not worship any other god, for the Lord whose name is jealous is a jealous God. He will not take second fiddle, and nor will he share a throne. He's God. Otherwise, you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and someone might invite you to eat of his sacrifice. And that you might take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. You shall make for yourselves no molten gods. So they are prohibited from marrying those in the land. And the reason for that is because they will be led away into idolatry. It's always so disappointing that you would think the people of God who had witnessed the 10 plagues, who had been led through the wilderness, who had been led through the Red Sea, that when they met people who were worshiping idols, you would think that they would convert the idolaters to the one true God, that they would say, look, you're worshiping a rock that can't do anything. Let me tell you about a real God. But that's never how it seems to happen. Probably because the very nature of idolatry is to form a God in the image of your own appetites. And that's what makes it so tempting as well. That's what we want to do anyway. And that just seems to be the way things go. Well, in Numbers chapter 25, as we're in this place where Balaam has been hired to curse Israel on behalf of Moab, the very warnings that we just read in Exodus 34, you see how it comes to play or comes out in Numbers chapter 25, verse 1, where we read, while Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. And then the fierce anger of the Lord comes, and there ends up being a plague that takes the lives of 24,000 by the time you get down to verse 9. So the very warning of Exodus is don't do this because they will lead you away from God. And then that's exactly what happens in Moab with daughters of Moab in Numbers chapter 25. All of that, with all of that history, with all of that teaching, and with those commandments, it's incredible that a man of Judah from Bethlehem chooses to go to Moab, and there he dies, and then Naomi, rather than coming home, stays and oversees her two sons marrying women from that culture, which you would think guarantee that they're never coming back to Israel. They're not going to be able to bring their wives back. These are forbidden wives from a different religion, and they are forbidden because specifically they're from Moab. So you would think that when Naomi goes to the wedding of her sons, it seals her fate that she will never go back to Israel. Interestingly enough, at the end of verse 4, it says, and they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. 10 years pass in their marriages. Ruth and the other Moabite woman, Orpah, have been married to their Israelite husbands for 10 years, and there's no children. Now that's interesting that this young couple, both of these young couples, have not been able to have any children. And that would be really odd, really unusual. It also would be very discouraging from several different directions. One is, in those days, that was considered the very role of the wife, of course, was to be a mother. And so if she's not a mother, then she's not much of a wife, etc. We saw Sarah live under that, and Rachel as well. But from a pragmatic or practical standpoint, that's also their future. If they don't have any children, okay, so the two wives can take care of Naomi as she ages, but then who's going to take care of them if they don't have any children? That's where their financial and social and physical security resides, is in their children. So no children for 10 years. And then the husbands die. So now it's just Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws. No grandchildren. There's no future. There's no family. Without any men in their lives, the family has ended right there. Verse 6, then Naomi arose with her daughter-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So we know that's why they left, is because the famine was so severe. And now that she hears that there's food again, she's ready to go back. But we know that at least 10 years have passed. That's a long time for a famine to last or for the struggle to continue. Hard times, to say the least. But it is interesting that she hears the Lord has visited his people, that she understands that this food has been provided by the Lord. He's the one that controls the weather. He's the one that provides famine or feast. And that's interesting, because there's a big question that's coming before we get done with this chapter. So she leaves the place that she was, her and her two daughter-in-laws, and they travel to go to Judah. But in verse 8, she pulls them aside and says, "Go return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the houses of her husband." She kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said, "No, we'll surely return with you and to your daughter, or to your people." But Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Do I have sons in my womb that they could still be your husbands? Go home. One, I'm too old to have a husband. And even if I had a husband, and even if I could bear a son, would y'all wait here until they're grown up? Because they don't have any children, and if they wait even longer, then it's even less likely they can have children. So don't throw away your future," she says. Now, it's also interesting to note the way Naomi talks about this when she says in verse 8, "Each of you go to your mother's house." Again, generally, as we said, a woman's protection and provider was her father first, and by extension or in conjunction with that, brothers, and then her husband. And then finally, her sons. That's just the way the world worked. Well, Naomi has no husband and has no sons. Ruth has no husband. And it's interesting that she says, "Go to your mother's house." Doesn't say your father's house, which seems to suggest that, like Naomi's husband, that perhaps Ruth and Orpah's fathers had also passed. There's no mention of brothers either. To go to your mother's house, that's an interesting way to say that. She should have said father or brother. But if all that is in their home is their mother, then they have the same problem. But at least they would be in their own country. At least they'd be among their own people. And at least there would be the possibility for they are young enough still to be able to potentially attract a new husband, and then life can continue. The other thing that's interesting about verse 8, well, let me go just a little bit further. So she says in verse 13, why would you refrain from marrying? "No, my daughter," she says, "it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." So Naomi really feels like that God is against her, that God is if not attacking her, at least punishing her. In fact, when she finally gets home to Bethlehem, all the women gather around in verse 19 and say, "Is this Naomi?" And she says, "Don't call me Naomi," because that's a word that means sweet or pleasant. "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter. Don't call me pleasant or sweet, call me bitter. Why? She says, "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord is witness against me and the Almighty has afflicted me?" And then they settle in, and turns out it's time for the barley harvest. Now, here's the big question. You see, when she tells her daughter-in-laws to leave, one of them does, because everything that Naomi says makes sense. There's no future. Now, Jonathan stares across a ravine at a lot of these, and he knows that they are absolutely outnumbered, and there's no way. But he said, the Lord it doesn't bother him if he wants to use just a couple of guys or wants to use a bunch of us. I mean, it's not really about us. It's about God's strength and power anyway. Well, Ruth is not looking at a lot of these, at least not directly. Now, she's not going to have any protection, so if somebody did want to come after her, she doesn't have much of any kind of option. But she's looking at literally starving to death. She has no home. Whatever home that Naomi had, because they were sojourners, the text says, that he may not have even owned anything, especially if they followed like Israel did, its ancestral lands and it's inherited, and it's not like a foreigner can come in and buy it up. Regardless, Naomi's leaving whatever lodging they had, which leaves Ruth no place to go except her mother's home. But maybe she just, because it's her mother's home, not her father's home, maybe she just adds another mouth to the table that her mother's already going to have to struggle with. But to go with Naomi back to Israel would be a nightmare, because at least in her mother's home, it's her mom and it's her home country, and she can attract another Moabite fella, and that's a lot more possible. If she goes to Israel with Naomi, Naomi has no future. Naomi doesn't know what she's going to do. They're going to end up living in a cave because Naomi doesn't own anything, has no place. It's been sold in their poverty of leaving Israel. So Naomi's going home to nothing. And Ruth is not an Israelite woman. She is the enemy. She is the recent enemy. It wasn't that long ago that the Israelites were having to serve under the oppression of Moab. And the Israelites have been told the Moabites have no place in the assembly of God. So she is an outcast. There's no reason. Naomi's right. There's no reason for Ruth to go with Naomi. You can say, well, she really loved Naomi and wants to take care of her. Well, obviously. But there's no future. And that's what Naomi's trying to tell her, because both daughter-in-laws weep over Naomi and they don't want to go, and they both love her, so that's a positive thing. But what Ruth says in verse 6 of chapter 1, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go. You remember how the armor bearer says, you turn here and I'll be there. You turn this way and I'll be there? Listen to this wise woman speak. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Wow. She's throwing her life away to try to care for Naomi. In doing so, she is sealing her fate. She has no future with Naomi. But why? Why is she so committed? Now, notice she says this, thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her, and so they go. Naomi knows the name of God. The word Lord here, it's the word the I am, the Yahweh, the Jehovah. It's God's name. It's the name that God gave Moses from the burning bush. This is who Israel knows him as. This is the Lord. So she knows his name. And not only does she know his name, but she refers to him as the arbiter, the judge, the one who is ultimately in power. May the Lord do to me, and worse, she takes a vow based on the character of God. What does Ruth know about the Lord? She's a Moabitess. This Israelite family moves into her neck of the woods, and she meets and falls in love with one of the young sons, and they're married for 10 years. For 10 years, she's a part of this family, these Israelites. I don't know why they left Bethlehem. I mean, they leave because of the famine, but why leave the place where God is to go to a place where they don't serve God? Well, desperation, but where is their faith in that God will provide? Because when they got back to Israel and Bethlehem, all their neighbors were still there. It's not like everybody died. So they did make it. Notice the way Naomi, because Naomi regularly refers to the Lord and refers to him by his I am, by his name. That's the name of that depicts his sovereignty, and it is the name for the covenant-keeping God. That's the one who said, I am, tells you to go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. I mean, I'm keeping my covenant, my promise that he made to Abraham. So the first time in the text that the Lord is referred to is by Naomi up in verse 6, because she hears the Lord had visited his people and brought them food. Well, so she is giving God all the credit for why things are better in Israel. And then in verse 8, she pronounces a blessing, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So she's asking the Lord's blessing on Ruth. Now, in Naomi's mind, if God is just a mean, ugly God who is nothing but trouble and caused her all this misery, this is not what, if she cared for Ruth at all. Now, if she said, may the Lord curse you because, he hates everybody and he's mean and he's cruel, and so maybe he'll sick after you for a while and give me a little bit of a breather. She pronounces a blessing on Ruth from the Lord. She recognizes that good things come from the Lord. He's visited his people and brought them food. And then she believes that the Lord is the source of blessing, just like the food. And now she hopes the same for Ruth. She does describe her condition in verse 13 when she says, I don't have any sons. She says, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. And she says that several times about how the Lord is against her, like in verse 20, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Again, the question, why does Ruth choose to stay with Naomi, choose what would seem like from every possible point of view, a hopeless future, and then she chooses Naomi's people and Naomi's God, and your God will be my God? Why? What does she know about God? What has she learned from Naomi over the last 10 years about who God is? Because the Moabites serve all kinds of gods. There's idols everywhere. That's not. But they're not I am. They're not God. They're not the Lord, the God of Israel. Couldn't you conclude that the God of Israel either is powerless or is heartless? Because, there's a famine in Israel. So where's your God? Why isn't he providing? So Naomi recognizes the Lord is the source of what is good. He is the source of any blessing. Now, it's her understanding, or she assumes, that the Lord has gone forth against me. She didn't elaborate, so I don't know because of this or because of that. But here's a really interesting question, and I think it's one that Job asks as well. Because in the middle of Job's troubles, as his friends are saying, wow, you must really messed up for God to be this mad at you, and Job's like, I don't think that's what it is. Job would rather be punished by God than anyone else. You have a couple of choices here, see? Satan is in charge and he's just knocking us around and he's abusing us left and right. Or God is allowing Satan to do that. Neither one are a pleasant option, but what an interesting choice. In Job, we learn that God allows Satan to bring the hurt into Job's life. That the hurt comes from Satan. But God allows it. So the good news is, Satan can't just willy-nilly do whatever he wants to. He has to have God's permission. And that's before Jesus defeated him on the cross, even in Job's day. So how much more so now that he has been chained or he has been restricted, he has been defeated by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Satan doesn't get to do whatever he wants. He can only do what God allows. So that's the good news. That's also the hard news, because God allows things that we would wish he didn't. So now the choice is this. Is God in charge or not? See, Job would rather be punished by God than by Satan. When I was a young man, especially as a little boy growing up, I required apparently a lot of discipline. And some of those episodes were very memorable, to say the least. I remember on several occasions standing before my mother, too. In fact, my mother disciplined us more often because she was at home with us more often and was more readily a witness to the need for discipline. But I also have very vivid memories of standing before my dad quaking because discipline was forthcoming. But on several occasions where it was kind of a group project of foolishness and each of the fathers pulled aside their sons and handled that as was necessary, while I was, crying and scared or this is going to hurt kind of thing. But I can still vividly remember the relief, because when the posse was first rounded up of all the wrongdoers and general different men, were beginning to bring correction to the situation, I remember distinctly the relief when my father got my hand and pulled me out of the group to discipline me himself. And the funny thing is probably, thinking back on it, I probably would have been disciplined less had some other man disciplined me. But still, and I think I probably knew that, but I still preferred and felt relief when it was my father who was going to discipline me, because I knew he loved me. And I trusted him. I knew it was going to hurt, but I knew he loved me and I trusted him. So it was going to be discipline, it was going to be suffering, etc., but it wasn't going to be destruction. I don't know if I've explained that well enough, but I think that's a very profound thought when we ask ourselves, when we suffer, do we want to suffer at the hands of God or someone else? So Naomi believes that she is suffering. Well, and I mean, it's definitely not been an easy life. Is she blaming God? Or does she recognize that just like every good gift comes from God, so does discipline? Later, the Hebrew writer will say in chapter 12 that God disciplines every son whom he loves. That's a sign of being legitimate, is that we are being disciplined. Because my question is, after living with Naomi for 10 years, why does Ruth say, I want your God, when she's got plenty of her own? There has to be something going on in Naomi's faith, as difficult as it has been, for Ruth to want to make that choice. So Naomi said at the end of verse 13, the Lord has gone forth against me. She's just stating the facts. I mean, they starved out on the farm. They had to move to Moab. Then her husband died, and then her sons died. She believes that God is in charge of all of that because she believes that God, when visiting, is the one who brought food to Israel. So that's all God's doing. I don't know that I have an argument. And then when she says, when Naomi talks to those at the city of Bethlehem, when they get back, the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. That doesn't mean that God has abused me or that God has wronged me or that God has even punished me, but what he has done is bitter to me. Well, how else would you describe the loss of a husband and the loss of two sons? Is not God the author of life? Isn't it God who determines who lives and who dies? Isn't it God who determines whether our heart beats the next time or we take the next breath? Isn't it God who determines which side of eternity we currently exist in? So God has determined that her husband would die and her two sons would die. I can't think of a better word than the word bitter. Verse 21, I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. She went out full. Well, they lost their crops. They lost their farm. They moved to Moab out of desperation because of the famine, and it was just her and her husband, just the two of them. And it was when they got to Moab that she had two sons, which would have been great. Two sons, that's fantastic. How is that full? I went out full, but now I've come back empty. I went out full. Interesting, I went out full, but who brought her back? The Lord did. You see how she gives credit to the Lord? I don't know if that's the right way to say that she recognizes it's the Lord's work. The Lord brought me back empty. And that's how she feels, right? I mean, she had a husband, then she had two sons, and now she has none of that. And she has no future, right? No place to stay. Ruth has to bring food to Naomi, or Naomi's not even eating. So she has no food, no shelter, so she's empty. But that's another significant thing to consider. When we desire wisdom, when we desire strength, when we desire peace, that's not an add-on. That's not a remodel. That's a tear down and start fresh. Naomi has to be empty. Why do you call my Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? That's the language of Job. And she's right. So it's not, you could say, well, she should just be so much more trusting. And, well, okay, maybe, but boy, what she's going through hurts a lot. And is scary. And I don't know, would you rather be stabbed to death or would you rather starve to death? Would you rather be pierced with a spear or have hunger pains? Would you rather die for lack of shelter? So it is hard. But it's interesting how she constantly refers to the Lord. Constantly refers to the Lord. Ruth is going to go out to find food for Naomi, and in so doing, she's going to meet a man named Boaz. And then when she goes back, Naomi's going to again reference a blessing upon Boaz because of the way she treats Ruth. So we need to do some more exploration, because what happens next in chapter 2 is an amazing story of the interaction between Ruth and Boaz. And there's a really special word that is used for Boaz. In the translation, reading it in English, we might miss a connection here that is one of the most powerful words in Scripture. Ruth knew enough about the Lord from Naomi's faith that Ruth said, I'm going with you. Her odds were better to stay in Moab. Weren't great, but they were better. In Israel, she has no chance. Her very life is at risk in Israel because she's the enemy in every form and fashion. She is of the Moabites who have enslaved and oppressed Egypt earlier. She's a Moabitess. She's one of those harlots that have led people off into idolatry. I mean, she is everything wrong. So to go to Israel, there's no hope. But she chooses to do it. And she's a woman of character. She's a woman of virtue. She's a woman of loyalty. But she is a wise woman because she makes a choice that makes all the difference. Skip to the end in chapter 4. Boaz and Ruth are going to get married, and they're going to have a son. You remember how she went 10 years without any children in her previous marriage. But in chapter 4, in verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive. Verse 14, the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer. May his name be famous in Israel. Verse 17, the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed, and he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Turn finally to Matthew chapter 1. Ruth was an amazingly wise woman. Matthew 1 and verse 1, the record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. And Ram was the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon. And Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. And Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David the king, whose descendant will be Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Savior, and the Redeemer of all mankind. What a wise woman. We've got some more to explore, getting to know Ruth and how she not only gains her wisdom, where it comes from, but the choices she makes and how the Lord blesses her because of those choices.
The ground began to shake, the stone was rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated. Forever he is glorified. Forever he is lifted high. Forever he is risen. He is alive. He is alive. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb is overcome. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb